I never thought a space heater could bring down an entire HOA board. But here I am, sitting in my attorney's office watching the dominoes fall one by one. My name is Branson, and I'm a software developer who moved to Phoenix, Arizona 6 months ago for a job opportunity. The apartment complex I found, Desert Vista Heights, seemed perfect at first. Modern units, decent rent, and a pool I'd never use but appreciated having. What I didn't appreciate was discovering that the place had an HOA run by a woman named Patricia Hendricks, though everyone called her Patty the pit bull behind her back. She was 52, wore her blonde hair in that demanding to speak to the manager Bob, and treated the HOA rules like they were carved into stone tablets by God himself. The whole mess started in late November, when temperatures in Phoenix actually dropped below 70 degrees at night. I know that sounds ridiculous to anyone from actual cold states, but my apartment had terrible insulation, and the central heating system was a joke. The vents in my bedroom barely pushed out warm air, and I'd wake up freezing at 3 in the morning. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I bought a space heater from Target. Nothing fancy, just a basic ceramic tower heater that cost about $45. I set it up in my bedroom, and suddenly I could sleep through the night without piling on 3 blankets. Everything was fine for about 2 weeks. Then I came home from work on a Tuesday evening in early December to find a notice taped to my door. The bright yellow paper fluttered in the desert breeze, and my stomach dropped before I even read it. The HOA loved their notices. This one was typed in aggressive bold font. Violation notice. Unauthorized electrical appliance usage detected. Space heaters are prohibited per HOA bylaws section 12.4.7. Remove immediately or face fines of $50 per day. I stood there reading it 3 times, convinced I was missing something. Space heaters were prohibited. I'd read through the HOA rules when I signed my lease, or at least I thought I had. Maybe I'd skimmed that part. But seriously, who bans space heaters in rental units? I crumpled the notice and went inside, immediately digging out my copy of the HOA bylaws from the drawer where I kept important documents. 40 minutes of reading through dense legal language later, I found it. Buried in Section 12, Subsection 4, Paragraph 7, was indeed a rule stating that portable heating devices exceeding 750 watts were prohibited due to fire safety concerns. My heater was 1,500 watts. Technically, they had me, but the rule seemed insane. The central heating in these apartments was garbage, and they expected us to just freeze. I decided to call the property management company the next morning. My landlord was a guy named Marcus Chen, who owned several units in the complex and rented them out. He'd been pretty reasonable when I'd had a leaky faucet fixed in October, so I figured he'd have some insight. "Hey Blake, what's up?" Marcus answered on the second ring, sounding distracted. "I got an HOA violation notice about my space heater. Did you know they banned them here?" There was a pause. "Space heater? Yeah, technically that rule exists, but honestly, nobody enforces it. Most people have them because the heating in those units sucks. I've been asking the HOA to upgrade the HVAC system for 2 years. Well, someone's enforcing it now. Patricia Hendricks sent me a violation notice." Marcus groaned. "Oh God, Patty. Yeah, she's been on a power trip lately. Just keep the heater, Blake. She does these sweeps every few months, sends out a bunch of notices, then forgets about it. The fines aren't even enforceable because they'd have to prove you still have it, and they can't enter your unit without permission." That made me feel better, sort of. I thanked Marcus and hung up, deciding to ignore the notice. I shoved my space heater into the bedroom closet during the day, just to be safe, and only pulled it out at night. Problem solved, right, wrong. A week later, I came home to find another notice, this one threatening a $50 fine added to my next rent payment. I called Marcus again, and he told me the same thing, ignore it. They couldn't actually enforce it. But the notices kept coming. One per week, each one more aggressive than the last. By mid-December, Patricia was threatening to take me to small claims court for continued willful violation of community standards. The whole thing was absurd. I'd seen her around the complex a few times, always wearing athletic where that looked too expensive for someone to actually exercise in, always carrying a clipboard, always looking for something to complain about. She'd yelled at me once for parking my car in a guest spot when all the resident spots were full. Never mind that it was 11 at night and there were literally no other cars in the guest lot. Rules were rules, according to Patricia. Then things got weird. I came home from work on a Friday evening in late December, about 3 weeks before Christmas, to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Not wide open, but definitely not latched. My heart started pounding. I pulled out my phone, ready to call 911, and slowly pushed the door open. Everything looked normal at first glance. TV still on the wall, laptop still on the kitchen counter. I walked through each room carefully, checking for anything missing or disturbed. When I got to the bedroom, I noticed immediately my space heater was gone. It had been sitting next to my bed that morning when I left for work. Now there was just an empty space and the outlet it had been plugged into. I checked the closet, under the bed, everywhere. Gone. Someone had broken into my apartment and stolen my $45 space heater while leaving everything else untouched. I called the police and filed a report, though the officer who showed up seemed bemused by the whole situation. "Just the heater?" he asked, looking around at my TV and other electronics. "Nothing else, just the heater. And my door wasn't forced. Someone either had a key or picked the lock." He wrote everything down, gave me a case number, and told me there probably wasn't much they could do. Property crimes under $50 weren't exactly priority cases. After he left, I called Marcus. "Someone broke into my apartment and stole my space heater," I told him. "What? Are you serious?" "Dead serious. Filed a police report and everything." The door was unlocked when I got home, and that's the only thing missing. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's really strange, Blake. I'll call the HOA office tomorrow and ask if anyone saw anything suspicious. Do you need me to change your locks?" "Probably a good idea, yeah." He came by that Saturday and changed the locks himself, refusing to charge me for it. "This is bizarre," he kept saying. "In all the years I've owned properties here, I've never heard of a break-in where they only take a cheap appliance." I bought another space heater that afternoon, this time keeping the receipt. I also set up a small security camera I had lying around, positioning it to face my bedroom door. If someone came back, I'd have proof. They didn't come back, but my electric bill did. I got the statement in early January, and my jaw dropped. The bill was for $347. My previous month's bill had been $92. I'd triple-checked my usage, looked at the meter readings, even called the electric company to make sure there wasn't an error. They assured me the readings were correct. My apartment had used significantly more electricity in December than in November. But that made no sense. I'd been using my space heater in November too, before Patricia started sending notices. And in December, my heater had been stolen halfway through the month. If anything, my usage should have gone down. I called Marcus again, and this is where things started to click into place. $347, Marcus repeated. "Blake, that's insane. I need to check something." "Can you send me a photo of your bill?" I texted it to him while we were on the phone. I heard him typing on his computer, then a long silence. Blake, this is really weird. I just checked my account for your unit. The bill the complex received for your apartment is $98. What? But the electric company is telling me I owe $347. Hold on, let me look at the other units. More typing. Okay, this is strange. Unit 2A, that's Mrs. Rodriguez, her bill is normal. Unit 3C, normal. But Unit 2B, that's supposed to be you, shows $98. And then there's another charge here listed under Unit 2B Auxiliary for $249. What the hell is Unit 2B Auxiliary? That's not a thing. No, it's definitely not a thing, unless... Marcus trailed off. Blake, I'm going to call the electric company. This might take a while. I'll call you back. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Marcus sounded angry, which was unusual for him. He was normally the most laid-back landlord I'd ever had. Blake, you're not going to believe this. I finally got through to a supervisor at the electric company. Your apartment, Unit 2B, has 2 meters. The main meter for your unit and a secondary meter that was installed about 6 years ago. The secondary meter is supposed to be disconnected because it was only used during some renovation work, but it's active, and it's been drawing power. Where is this secondary meter? That's what I asked. Apparently, it's connected to an outlet in the HOA office. I felt my blood pressure spike. The HOA office? Yeah, the office is in Unit 1A, which is owned by the HOA. But apparently, when they did renovations back in 2018, they needed extra power and tapped into the line for Unit 2B. They were supposed to disconnect it after the work was done, but someone marked it as auxiliary emergency power and it stayed active. So the HOA has been using my electricity for 6 years. Not exactly. According to the usage history, that secondary meter barely pulled any power until mid-December. Then it spiked dramatically. Mid-December. Right after my space heater was stolen. Marcus, I think Patricia Hendricks stole my space heater and is using it in the HOA office. That's a pretty serious accusation, Blake. Think about it. She knew I had one because she kept sending me violation notices. She's the only one with master keys to all the units because she's HOA president. My heater disappears, and suddenly the meter connected to the HOA office shows a massive spike in usage consistent with running a 1500-watt space heater constantly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. If you're right, that's theft and fraud, but we'd need proof. The electric company won't let us access the HOA office without permission. Then let's get permission, or better yet, let's just ask her directly. Blake, I don't think I'm going to the HOA office right now. Come with me if you want. I hung up before he could argue and headed downstairs. The HOA office was on the first floor, a small suite with Desert Vista Heights Homeowners Association stenciled on the frosted glass door. I didn't bother knocking, just walked right in. Patricia Hendricks sat behind a desk, typing on a laptop. She looked up and her expression immediately soured when she saw me. Mr. Branson, you need to make an appointment. Where's my space heater? She blinked. Excuse me, my space heater. The one that was stolen from my apartment 3 weeks ago. Where is it? I have no idea what you're talking about. If you've had property stolen, you should contact the police. I did. Filed a report and everything. Isn't it interesting that the only thing stolen was a space heater? The space heater you kept sending me violation notices about. Patricia stood up, her face flushing. I don't appreciate your tone, Mr. Branson. If you're accusing me of something, you'd better have proof. Otherwise, I'll have you cited for harassment. Fine. Let's talk about proof. My electric bill tripled last month. My landlord checked with the electric company and found out there's a secondary meter connected to this office that's been pulling massive amounts of power since mid-December. Right around the time my heater disappeared. Her face went from red to pale in about 2 seconds. That's ridiculous. This office barely uses any electricity. Then you won't mind if we check. You can't just barge in here and search the office. This is HOA property. Actually, came Marcus's voice from behind me. Apparently he'd followed me down. As a property owner in this complex, I have every right to inspect HOA facilities. And right now, I'm very concerned about potential misuse of utilities. He pushed past me and started looking around the small office. There was a storage room in the back, and he headed straight for it. Patricia tried to block him, but he was already opening the door. There, in the corner of the storage room, plugged into a wall outlet and running full blast, was my space heater. I recognized it immediately because I'd put a small piece of blue tape on the cord to mark which way it plugged in. The tape was still there. "That's not his," Patricia said quickly. "That's HOA property. We've had that for years." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the receipt from Target with the purchase date and the heater's model number. "Because I bought this exact model on November 15th. And I can prove this specific unit is mine because of that blue tape. That's my handwriting on it." Marcus unplugged the heater and examined it. "There's also a serial number on the bottom. Blake, do you have the box this came in?" "Yeah, at home. Go get it. We're calling the police." Patricia's composure cracked. "Wait, let's just all calm down. There's clearly been a misunderstanding. Maybe the heater got mixed up during a maintenance check or something." "Maintenance check?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You broke into my apartment, stole my property, and have been using it to heat your office while charging me for the electricity. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft and fraud. I didn't break in. I used my master key to confiscate a prohibited item. That's within my authority as HOA president." Marcus shook his head. "No, Patricia, it's really not. HOA rules don't override criminal law. You can't just enter someone's home and take their property." I called the police for the second time in 3 weeks. The same officer from before showed up, and when I explained the situation, he actually looked interested this time. Once I showed him the original police report, my receipt, the matching serial number on the box, and the heater running in the HOA office, he turned to Patricia. "Madam, I'm going to need you to come with me to answer some questions. This is absurd. I was enforcing HOA bylaws. By stealing his property and illegally using his electricity. That's theft and potentially fraud. You have the right to remain silent." Watching Patricia get read her Miranda rights in her own office was surreal. She kept sputtering about rules and authority and how this was all a big misunderstanding. The officer confiscated my heater as evidence after photographing everything, and I gave a detailed statement. After they left, Marcus and I sat in the office, both somewhat stunned. "I can't believe she actually did this," Marcus said. "I knew she was power-hungry, but this is criminal." "How long has she been HOA president?" "About 4 years. She basically appointed herself when the previous president moved away. Nobody else wanted the job, so she ran unopposed." I thought about something. "Marcus, if she's been using that secondary meter since mid-December and it's connected to my account, do I have to pay that $300 bill? Hell no. I'm calling the electric company right now to dispute the charges. That usage wasn't yours. We have proof she was using your power without permission." Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. The police investigation revealed that Patricia had indeed entered my apartment using her master key while I was at work. Security cameras in the parking lot showed her carrying something tower-shaped out of the building on the day my heater was stolen, though the footage wasn't clear enough to definitively identify what it was. Combined with the heater being found in her office, my receipt, and the electric usage records, the prosecutor felt they had a solid case. But it got worse for Patricia. Much worse. During their investigation, the police obtained a warrant to search the HOA office more thoroughly. What they found was a treasure trove of misconduct. Patricia had been systematically abusing her position for years. She'd been collecting violation fines from residents, always in cash or checks made out directly to her, and pocketing the money instead of depositing it into the HOA account. She'd been using her master key to enter units while residents were away and confiscating items she deemed violations, from holiday decorations to planters to doormats. Her storage room was full of other people's belongings. The electric company launched their own investigation and discovered that the secondary meter situation was even more complicated than we'd initially thought. Patricia had known about the auxiliary connection for years and had deliberately been using it to power space heaters in the HOA office during winter months, knowing the charges would be billed to whoever lived in Unit 2B at the time. The previous tenant had apparently complained about high winter bills, but had moved out before figuring out why. I'd just been the first person determined enough to actually investigate. The HOA board, which consisted of Patricia and 2 other residents, held an emergency meeting to remove her as president. One of the board members, a retired accountant named Dorothy Mills, went through the HOA financial records and discovered Patricia had embezzled over $18,000 in the past 3 years through fake vendor invoices, unauthorized administrative fees, and pocketed fines. By late January, Patricia Hendricks was facing multiple charges: theft, burglary, fraud, embezzlement, and unauthorized computer access for tampering with the electric meter records. The prosecutor was particularly interested in the embezzlement angle because that was a felony. I got my space heater back after it was released from evidence, though I bought a new one anyway because the whole thing felt weird now. The electric company credited my account for the disputed charges and disconnected the auxiliary meter permanently. Marcus negotiated a settlement with the HOA for my trouble, a 1-month rent credit, and a written apology. The preliminary hearing was in February, and I had to testify. Patricia showed up with a lawyer who tried to argue that she'd been acting in her capacity as HOA president and had genuinely believed she had authority to confiscate prohibited items. The judge wasn't buying it. "Miss Hendricks, let me make sure I understand your position," the judge said, peering over her reading glasses. "You're arguing that HOA bylaws gave you authority to enter a resident's private dwelling, take his personal property without notice or due process, use that property for your own benefit, and charge him for the electricity you consumed while using his stolen property." Patricia's lawyer started to respond, but the judge held up her hand. "Because if that's your argument, counselor, I'm going to suggest you rethink your legal strategy. This isn't an HOA dispute. This is a criminal matter involving multiple felonies." The preliminary hearing resulted in Patricia being bound over for trial on all charges. Her lawyer immediately started negotiating a plea deal. In the meantime, life at Desert Vista Heights changed dramatically. Dorothy Mills took over as interim HOA president and immediately started reforming everything. The space heater rule was amended to allow devices under 2,000 watts with automatic shut-off features. The policy of allowing the HOA president to have master keys was eliminated. Only maintenance staff could have them now, and they had to log every entry. All HOA financial transactions had to be approved by at least 2 board members and documented in detail. Several other residents came forward with complaints about Patricia. Mr. Kowalski in Unit 3D had been fined $200 for parking a work truck in his spot overnight because Patricia said commercial vehicles violated HOA rules. There was no such rule in the bylaws. She just made it up. Mrs. Rodriguez had been cited multiple times for having potted plants on her balcony that were allegedly unapproved species. Again, no such rule existed. Patricia had apparently just disliked the color of the flowers. The more we learned, the more it became clear that Patricia had been running Desert Vista Heights like her personal fiefdom, making up rules on the fly and enforcing them arbitrarily against anyone who annoyed her. The plea negotiations dragged on through March. Patricia's lawyer wanted the felony embezzlement charge dropped in exchange for guilty pleas on the misdemeanor theft and fraud charges. The prosecutor refused. The evidence of embezzlement was too strong, and the amount was too large to ignore. Finally, in early April, Patricia accepted a plea deal. Guilty to 1 count of felony embezzlement, 1 count of burglary, and 3 counts of theft. In exchange, the fraud and computer access charges would be dropped, and the prosecutor would recommend a sentence at the lower end of the guidelines. The sentencing hearing was in May, and I attended along with several other residents. Patricia stood before the judge, looking nothing like the imperious woman who'd terrorized our complex. She looked smaller somehow, defeated, wearing a plain gray dress instead of her usual expensive athletic wear. The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Hendricks, you held a position of trust in your community. Residents relied on you to manage their homeowners association fairly and honestly. Instead, you abused that trust at every opportunity. You stole from your neighbors, you invaded their privacy, and you lined your pockets with money that should have been used to maintain and improve the community you claim to serve." The judge sentenced her to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution for the embezzled funds, plus additional damages to the HOA and affected residents. The restitution totaled over $24,000. Patricia's lawyer argued that jail time was excessive for a first-time offender, but the judge shut that down quickly. "Miss Hendricks isn't a first-time offender. She's a first-time convicted offender. The evidence suggests she's been committing these crimes for years and only got caught because one victim was persistent enough to investigate. That's not someone who made a one-time mistake. That's someone who engaged in a pattern of criminal behavior." As the bailiff led Patricia away, she looked back at the courtroom. For just a moment, our eyes met. I expected to see anger or defiance, but instead she just looked exhausted and sad. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The restitution payments became their own drama. Patricia obviously didn't have $24,000 lying around, and her assets were limited. She'd already spent most of the embezzled money on her lifestyle, the expensive clothes, the leased BMW that had been repossessed, the luxury gym membership. The court ordered her to pay $100 per month after her release, which meant she'd be paying for years. The HOA used the recovered funds to make actual improvements to the complex. They upgraded the HVAC systems in several units, including mine. They repaved the parking lot, which had been full of potholes that Patricia had ignored. They hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations, taking the burden off volunteer board members. For me personally, the whole experience was educational in the worst way. I'd moved to Phoenix expecting a fresh start in a new city, and instead I'd gotten embroiled in a criminal investigation over a $45 space heater. But it also taught me something important about standing up for yourself. If I just paid that inflated electric bill without questioning it, Patricia would have gotten away with it. If I'd accepted her claims about having authority to confiscate my heater, she would have continued abusing other residents. Sometimes the system only works if people are willing to push back against those who abuse power, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Marcus became a friend through all of this. We started meeting up occasionally for beers and basketball games. He told me he'd owned rental properties for 12 years and had dealt with plenty of difficult HOAs, but he'd never seen anything quite like Patricia's reign of terror. "The crazy thing is," he said one evening at a sports bar in downtown Phoenix, "she probably would have kept getting away with it if she hadn't been so petty. If she'd just ignored your space heater, none of this would have come out." He was right. Patricia's downfall came from her inability to let anything go, her need to control every tiny detail of other people's lives. The space heater itself was meaningless. It was a minor violation of a rule that most people ignored. But Patricia couldn't stand the idea of someone defying her authority, even in such a small way. That pettiness cost her everything. The story made local news briefly. A reporter from the Arizona Republic wrote an article titled "HOA President Jailed for Stealing Heater, Embezzling Thousands." It was surreal seeing my experience laid out in newsprint, even though they didn't use my full name. The article quoted Dorothy Mills extensively about the reforms being implemented at Desert Vista Heights. The publicity had an unexpected effect. Several other HOA boards in the Phoenix area reached out to Dorothy asking for advice on preventing similar abuses. She ended up consulting with 3 other communities, helping them establish better oversight procedures and financial controls. She joked that Patricia had accidentally launched her retirement career. By summer, life at Desert Vista Heights had settled into a comfortable routine. The new management company was efficient and responsive. The reformed HOA board actually listened to residents. People started organizing community events again: pool parties, movie nights, holiday decorations contests, things that Patricia had discouraged because they created chaos and liability issues. I ran into Mrs. Rodriguez by the pool one Saturday in June. She was the elderly lady from Unit 2A who'd been hassled about her potted plants. "Mr. Branson," she said warmly, "I never got to properly thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For standing up to that woman. She made my life miserable for 2 years. Every week, another violation notice, another fine. I'm 76 years old, living on Social Security, and she wanted to fine me $50 because my begonias were the wrong color." She shook her head. "When you challenged her over that heater, it gave the rest of us courage. We realized we didn't have to just accept her nonsense." That conversation stuck with me. I'd been so focused on my own situation that I hadn't fully appreciated how my actions had affected others. Patricia had created an environment of fear and intimidation, where residents were afraid to complain or push back because she'd retaliate with fines and harassment. By refusing to back down, I'd inadvertently broken that cycle. The civil lawsuit came next. Several residents, including me, joined a class action suit against Patricia for the unauthorized entry into our units and theft of property. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover it since the acts were intentional crimes, not accidents. The lawsuit was mostly symbolic since Patricia had no money, but it resulted in a judgment against her for another $12,000 in damages and legal fees. Between the criminal restitution and the civil judgment, Patricia owed over $36,000. Her lawyer filed for bankruptcy on her behalf, but certain debts like restitution can't be discharged. She'd be paying for a very long time. I thought about Patricia sometimes during those summer months. What had driven her to become so controlling? so petty, so willing to abuse her position? Was it insecurity, a need for power in a life where she felt powerless? Or was she just one of those people who enjoyed making others miserable? I'd probably never know. After her sentencing, she disappeared from public view. Someone said she had family in Tucson and might move there after her release. Someone else heard she was appealing her conviction, though that seemed unlikely given she'd pled guilty. Rumors circulated, but I didn't really care enough to investigate. She was no longer my problem. The space heater itself became a running joke in the complex. Someone made a plaque that said the heater that took down an HOA and hung it in the community room. During the holiday party in December, someone gave me a gag gift, a cheap space heater wrapped in crime scene tape. Everyone laughed, including me. Marcus ended up buying 2 more units in the complex as investment properties. He said that with the HOA reforms, Desert Vista Heights had become a much more attractive place to own property. The vacancy rate dropped, and rental prices actually increased slightly because of the improved reputation. I thought about moving once my lease was up, but decided to stay. Despite everything, I'd come to like the place. My apartment was comfortable, my neighbors were friendly, and the location was convenient for work. Plus, I had the best conversation starter ever for parties. Let me tell you about the time I took down an HOA president with a $45 space heater. The following January, almost exactly a year after the whole mess started, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Patricia, postmarked from the county jail. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten, several pages long. In it, Patricia apologized for what she'd done. She explained, not as an excuse but as context, that she'd been going through a difficult divorce when she became HOA president. Taking control of the association had given her a sense of purpose and authority that she'd lost in other areas of her life. Over time, that control had become an addiction. She couldn't stop herself from finding violations, from enforcing rules, from punishing people who didn't follow her orders. The embezzlement had started small, taking $20 here and there to cover expenses, and had spiraled out of control. She wrote that jail had given her time to reflect on how badly she'd screwed up her life. She was in therapy, working through her control issues. She'd lost her marriage, her freedom, her reputation, and her financial security. All because she couldn't let people live their lives in peace. The letter ended with another apology and a request that I not respond. She didn't expect forgiveness, she wrote, but wanted me to know that she understood the harm she'd caused. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I didn't know how to feel about it. On one hand, it seemed like genuine remorse. On the other hand, Patricia had made a lot of people's lives miserable, and a letter didn't undo that damage. Maybe she really had changed. Maybe she was just sorry she got caught. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility to absolve her. Life moved on. I got a promotion at work in March, which came with a nice raise. I started dating someone I met at a coffee shop, a woman named Jennifer who worked as a teacher and thought my space heater story was hilarious. Marcus and I became regular basketball watching buddies, usually meeting up at his place or mine for big games. The HOA continued to function smoothly under Dorothy's leadership and the professional management company. Violation notices became rare and were always legitimate actual safety issues or clear rule violations, not made-up nonsense. The board held regular open meetings where residents could voice concerns. The financial reports were posted online for everyone to review. In June, I got notice that Patricia had been released from jail after serving 14 months with time off for good behavior. She immediately moved to Tucson to live with her sister. The residents of Desert Vista Heights collectively breathed a sigh of relief. Nobody wanted her anywhere near the complex. The criminal case was closed, the civil lawsuit was settled, and life returned to normal. The story became just an interesting anecdote, the kind of thing I'd tell at parties or used to break the ice with new neighbors. Yeah, I once brought down an entire HOA board over a space heater. Was one hell of an opening line. But beyond the entertainment value, the experience changed how I thought about community living and collective governance. HOAs aren't inherently bad, they serve important functions in maintaining property values and community standards. But they need proper oversight, checks and balances, and accountability. When one person accumulates too much power with too little supervision, abuse becomes almost inevitable. Desert Vista Heights became a case study in HOA reform. Dorothy wrote an article for a property management journal about the changes they'd implemented. Other communities adopted similar policies. The space heater incident, ridiculous as it sounds, actually led to meaningful improvements in how HOAs operate. As for me, I renewed my lease for another year. The upgraded HVAC system meant I didn't need a space heater anymore, which was ironic. But I kept one in my closet anyway, just in case. And sometimes, when I walked past the HOA office and saw Dorothy or one of the other board members working there, I remembered Patricia sitting behind that desk, typing on her laptop, convinced of her own authority. Power corrupts, they say, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Patricia had proven that even the small, petty power of an HOA presidency could corrupt someone who was susceptible to it. Her need to control, to punish, to enforce her will on others had destroyed her life and hurt dozens of people. But here's the thing I learned through all of this. Transparency and accountability are the antidotes to that corruption. When people ask questions, demand answers, and refuse to accept abuse from those in authority, systems can't stay broken. The residents of Desert Vista Heights had lived under Patricia's petty tyranny for years, but once someone finally pushed back hard enough, the whole rotten structure collapsed. I never expected a space heater to teach me about civic responsibility and institutional reform. I certainly never expected to become a minor folk hero in my apartment complex, but life surprises you sometimes. On a warm evening in August, the HOA held a community barbecue by the pool. Families came out, kids splashed in the water, and someone set up a speaker playing summer music. I sat with Marcus, Jennifer, Mrs. Rodriguez, and a few other neighbors, eating hamburgers and watching the sunset paint the Phoenix sky in shades of orange and purple. "You know," Marcus said, raising his beer bottle, "I'm going to propose a toast." "Oh God, here we go," I said, laughing. "No, seriously. To Blake and his space heater, may we always have the courage to question authority and demand accountability, even when it seems easier to just go along." Everyone raised their drinks and echoed the sentiment. Mrs. Rodriguez patted my hand and said something in Spanish that I didn't quite catch, but sounded affectionate. As the evening wore on and the sky darkened, I looked around at the community that had emerged from the ashes of Patricia's regime. People were happy, relaxed, enjoying each other's company without fear of arbitrary rules or petty punishment. This was what a homeowners association was supposed to be, a group of neighbors working together to maintain their shared space and build community. The space heater that started everything was in my apartment closet, largely unused thanks to the new HVAC system. But I'd never get rid of it. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest things can have the biggest consequences, and that standing up for yourself, even over something as trivial as a $45 appliance, can make a real difference. Patricia Hendricks would finish paying her restitution in about 15 years, assuming she made every payment. The judgment would follow her for the rest of her life. She'd lost everything: her position, her freedom, her reputation, her financial security, all because she couldn't resist the urge to control and punish someone over a space heater. And me. I'd learned that home isn't just about the physical space you live in. It's about the community around you, the people who have your back, and the willingness to fight for what's right even when it's difficult. Desert Vista Heights had become more than just an apartment complex. It had become a real community, forged in the aftermath of one woman's spectacular fall from grace. The irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia had wanted to create a perfectly controlled, perfectly orderly community where everyone followed the rules without question. What she'd actually created, through her abuse and eventual downfall, was a community bound together by shared experience and a commitment to doing better. As I walked back to my apartment that night, Jennifer beside me and the sounds of laughter still echoing from the pool area, I thought about how strange life could be. 6 months ago, I'd been angry and frustrated, dealing with violation notices and a stolen heater. Now I was happy, surrounded by friends, living in a community that actually functioned the way it was supposed to. All because I'd refused to just accept an unjust situation. All because I'd asked questions and demanded answers. All because I'd stood up to someone who abused their authority. The space heater had been the catalyst, but the real story was about something bigger. The power of ordinary people to create change when they refuse to accept injustice, no matter how petty it might seem. And that, I realized, was a lesson worth learning, even if it had come in the strangest possible way.